Good morning and welcome to the Greek pyramid, or perhaps not, as I would say, because I'll start off with this video with a negative. This is not, despite appearances and what you read on the internet, a Greek pyramid, and there is a lot of rubbish written about this place on the internet. Oh, it's 12,000 years old. Oh, it was built for shelter, humans to shelter from the big mastodons and the animals that roamed around. Oh, it's a UFO beacon or landing site. What it is very unique. It's very unusual to find this type of building here in Greece, and it would appear to be, from where we are, in the middle of nowhere. But don't believe everything you read on the internet. What I'm going to do is take an academic approach to this. I'm going to look at this. I live here. I live in this area, and I feel I know exactly what this building is for. And I'm going to present that to you today. I'm going to take various steps through assessing the evidence and the history to determine not only what this building is, but what the other buildings are. Because the trouble is, everyone takes this building in isolation. They go, oh, look, it's a Greek pyramid. But there are 13 of these around the Argolic plain. So what is it about? Why was it here? Who built it? What was its purpose? And when was it built? I'm going to answer that today. And I think I can be fairly convincing with it. So, putting the internet resource aside for a minute and looking at perhaps more credible literature, there are really only 4 sources that I have found which are credible and interesting enough to perhaps be worth considering as a literature review, if you like, step 1. And they are all focused on this one building, and I think that's half the problem. Everyone seems to focus on this one building because it looks like a pyramid, it's relatively well known, but it's not the only building. There are 13 of these buildings, as I said, around, and as you can see below me, the Argolic plain. And the problem comes in taking this building in isolation, because you can't make a reasonable assessment of this building in isolation, which would bring me to step probably 4. But step 1, literature review. So the first thing to say is that in 2017, the Greek Ministry of Culture put out a statement. They felt they needed to put out a statement. And they said 3 things. They said, 1, this is not a pyramid. And I completely agree with them. For starters, the walls only went up to about 3.8 meters. They didn't go any higher than that. There was no peak on this. There was no pinnacle. 3.8 meters, that was pretty well the top of the wall there. Number 2, they said this was likely a fort. I agree with that as well, because as we'll see in a minute, this is a very defensive building. And number 3, they said it was built likely in about 400 BC. Now, I don't normally disagree with the Ministry of Culture. They know a lot more about Greece than I do, but I fundamentally disagree with that. I think this building was built in about 2000 BC. But moving on with the literature. In 1991, there was a scientific assessment of this place where they took rock and they assessed the age of the construction using thermoluminescence. And there's some controversy about these results in the scientific community, so you take them with a pinch of salt. But they dated this construction to sometime between 2,500 and 3,000 BC. In 1937, the American Institute, Archaeological Institute of Athens, came here and they excavated the floor here, and they actually excavated 3 blockhouses. And I'm going to start calling these blockhouses, not pyramids, which was the only reference I can find to research involving the other buildings of this type in this area. And 60 centimeters down in this floor here, they found Mycenaean pottery dating to 2,000 to 2,500 years BC. So we've got potentially a building that is 2,000, 2,500 BC, 4,500 years old. Now, there was a Greek traveller, geographer and writer called Pausanias, and he came here in about the 2nd century BC, and he writes that the local population told him that this was a tomb and a memorial to a battle that occurred here in 668 or 669 BC between 2 warring families in Argos. And it was a stalemate, and they built this to remind themselves never to fight again, and as a tomb and a memorial to the dead from that battle. Now, that's entirely possible. This could easily have been repurposed for that. And when he came here, he said that these walls were lined with shields, memorial shields. Entirely possible, but it does not indicate for me the original purpose of this building and the other buildings around it. So the literature review is unsatisfying because very little work has been published on this building and any of the others. So step 2, let's have a look at this building very quickly ourselves and see what it tells us. Well, it was highly defensive. You can see the thickness of these walls. And it was very, very expensive. To create this building, this small building, would have been extremely expensive. Not something you're going to do on a whim. It's not a folly. It's not something just to be pretty in the landscape. It must have had a real serious purpose for them to spend the money and the time and the effort to construct this building and the 12 others that are around the Argolic plain. So what was that purpose? Well, we'll come to that. But it was highly defensive. If you look at the entrance here, there is obvious signs that there was a door here. You can see in the wall there's a door jamb there. So a door bar, that would indicate that there was a door that could be bolted or barred from the inside, which would prevent people from coming in here. You only close a door from the inside if it's defensive. And again, once you're in here, you come down this passageway, you're funneled down this passageway, which may well have been accessible from inside via a roof slot up here. And you're trapped because, yet again, if you look here, there's a door jamb. We come around onto the inside so you can see it more clearly. There's a door jamb. So there was another door here. You can see it on the sides here. And again, evidence that it could be barred very strongly from the inside. So the occupants of this building could secure themselves in here, perfectly safe in the knowledge that they were not going to have their throats slit at night, that if the local population was upset or someone was perhaps invading, they weren't going to die. But I don't think that was really the fundamental reason for having this here. But you can see, highly defensive, very interesting building. Now for step 3, what we need to do is go and look at some of the other blockhouses or pyramids that exist in the Argolic plain and see if there are noticeable similarities, if we can relate them together, if we can say, actually, yes, this building and the other buildings are all contemporary with each other. They all have a similar footprint. They all have a similar construction. They all have a similar purpose in their defense. So if we can't do that, then it's a building on its own and I'm completely wrong. So let's go and have a look at a couple of other blockhouses first and see how they compare to this one. So 22 kilometers drive north from the pyramid, and we have another pyramid, except obviously it isn't a pyramid. But what I will tell you is it's the same size. It has virtually the same footprint. It's about 9 meters square, which is what the pyramid was. And you can see it's also similar height. So let's go and have a look, see what other similarities we can see. So again, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, you can see the walls are about 3.84 meters high again, and you can see they're capped off this time. It's in better condition actually than the pyramid itself, although I would say it's rather less visited. And interestingly enough, yet again, we have an entrance in the corner here. Now, you're going to say to me, but it's not a pyramid, it's straight sides. Yes, it is. But that's virtually the only difference here, actually. If you look, you come in through this entrance. I'm being careful of snakes today. And you're into a corridor again. And, God, it's a bit overgrown in here, and I have to be a bit careful of the floor because there's a hole here. But you come in up into yet another blockhouse. This one has not been excavated, and you can see very, very similar. The corridor here, defensive as usual, in through the door, in through another door here. The interior is less maintained, but look at this. Amazing. And I would defy anyone to tell me this is not of the same era and the same construction. It's got the same purpose. It's just the only difference here is that the walls, instead of being 3 meters wide at the bottom, are the same width as they are at the top, perhaps about 1.5 meters. And you can see they're capped off with these stones. Now I have a theory about why the pyramid has sloped sides here at 60 degrees and why most of the other blockhouses, with the exception of one, which we will go and look at later, has straight sides. But it's only a theory, it's not based on fact. So I'm going to keep that to myself until the end of the video, and then I'll tell you my thoughts. Now, you know the expression, 1 is lucky, 2 is coincidence, 3 is planning. Well, we've seen 2, and I hope you agree with me that this and the pyramid, although the walls here aren't chamfered at 60 degrees, are virtually identical, and they have the same purpose. I can tell you that now. They were built at the same time, they're made of the same rock, they have the same construction, they've got virtually identical footprint, 9 meters by 9 meters, virtually the same height, about 3.8 to 4 meters. But I'm going to go and see a third one. Now I could go on, 13 I could see, but I'm going to go and see a third one, very local to this one actually. And we'll see what that one looks like. I can tell you now, it's not in the preservation of this one. But I've marked all of these on Google Earth, and I'm going to share a link to where they are in my video description, so you can have a look yourselves and see where they are. And I'm going to use Google Earth later in this video to demonstrate some fundamental thinking behind what these were here for. By the way, in the distance over there, between those two mountains, you can see the Acropolis of Mycenae, the capital of the Mycenaean civilization from about 1650 BC through to about 1250 BC, but younger than this building, 2000 BC. Relevant though, and we'll come back to it later as to why. So this railway line, which is now disused since 2011, was here in 1937. But before the railway line, this route was the Mycenaean road through the Argolic plain. And up here on the left, we have another blockhouse. Now this one is rather more ruined, but we're in a place called Fichti. And I hope you can see, although it's rather more ruined, it's exactly the same as the other two that we previously looked at, the pyramid and the previous blockhouse. Big limestone blocks, same construction. I can tell you it's about 9 meters by 9 meters, so it's a standard format plan, as we say. And 3, it's a plan. 2, it's luck, as I said. Here we have 3, it's a plan. But Fichti here is a little place, middle of the Argolic plain, but I think 4,000 years ago was the commercial centre of the Greek world, because there are 3 Mycenaean, and I'm going to call them Mycenaean, blockhouses, all within about 300 yards of each other here. This is one of them. I may go and see one more. I'm not going to see the other 2. But this was the centre, and the reason it was a centre is the reason why you have these blockhouses. So before I get to that, what I want to do is have a look at where these blockhouses are in relation to each other on Google Earth. So I've marked the 13 pyramids and blockhouses here on Google Earth, and you can see them. They're very much arranged around the Argolic plain with Argos in the centre. But let's zoom in to where we started this journey, the pyramid of Hellenic, which is here. Hopefully you can see it very clearly on this little raised hill here. And then let's zoom out and go to the second blockhouse that we visited, way up north here, 22 kilometres north. Zoom in, as you can see, in the middle of nowhere. And again, hopefully you can see very clearly here the plan, very similar footprint, very similar style. And coming out again and going south, we go to Fichti, again fairly central to all of these blockhouses. And by the railway line, we have the third one we looked at, that ruined blockhouse. Again, you can see very clearly the footprint. We're going to zoom out and go over to the far east of the blockhouses, near Peloponnese, which was one of the port cities of the Mycenaean Empire, shown here where the cursor is now as we zoom in. And if we follow the road up through this pass, we come to another blockhouse, but this one was the other pyramid. This blockhouse is the last blockhouse before you get to the Mycenaean port of Archaeological. And Archaeological was hugely important to the Mycenaeans. It was their port effectively into the Adriatic, and so this blockhouse here would have been incredibly important. But the reason I've come over here is not only because it's the furthest east, but because it's the only other pyramid blockhouse. I don't know if you can see it, but here you can see 60-degree angle, and maybe here you can see 60-degree angle. So there is another pyramid, and some of these blockhouses, which have since perhaps been destroyed, were probably other pyramids. Pausanias mentions in his writings that he heard of 2 other pyramid blockhouses to the south of the one that we looked at originally, so down into Arcadia, which had been destroyed. But this is a pyramid blockhouse, and I have a theory about this, and I said I would tell you why I thought some of them are pyramids and some of them are not. And it's all to do with defence and money. If you look here, you can see at the base here, or towards the base, the wall is really thick, perhaps 3 meters, and yet towards the top of the original pyramid blockhouse we looked at, it was similar to all the other walls, maybe 1.5 meters thick. And I think that's what this is about. I think that some of the blockhouses were in militarily sensitive locations, areas where they felt perhaps there might be trouble, and so they wanted to build them stronger. They wanted to build the walls thicker, but to build these was expensive and took a lot of effort and a lot of time. And so what they did was they built them thicker at the bottoms and then saved money, labour, materials by tapering them up at 60 degrees to be thinner at the top. And I think that's simply why some of them look like pyramids and some of them don't, because some of them they built to be stronger in areas where they felt that they were at more risk. This one is near the port. It's a risk because people coming up from the port to invade would attack this as the first defence along this Mycenaean road. And it's the same with the first pyramid we looked at. It's down by the coast, it's down by the Arcadian road, and again, perhaps down that route it was a little bit more lawless and they were more worried about it, so they built the walls thicker at the base. They didn't need to be so thick further up because people aren't going to attack them further up. They're going to attack them at the base. And in other locations they didn't need to do that, so they built straight walls instead. I was going to say narrow diameter walls, but they're still 1.5 meters or so. But you can see here, this is a fantastic 9x9 pyramid blockhouse. And so we've now seen, I think, 5. We're going to go and see a 6th, but the key thing here, and I keep mentioning it, is the Mycenaean road. So let's go back to my Google Maps and let's overlay onto the locations of these blockhouses the old Mycenaean road network, as it would have been the trading network which existed many years before. So back up in the sky again with our 14 blockhouses and pyramids marked on the map, let's have a look what happens when we overlay the original Mycenaean road network of 4,000 years ago. This is a road network that existed then. It may follow some existing roads, but many it doesn't. And you'll see some interesting things. For example, up here, we have a grouping of blockhouses. What's that all about? Why are they all there? It seems a bit strange. But let's look back down here and let's overlay the key buildings and settlements that existed in Mycenaean times, and suddenly it makes even more sense. So for example, down on the right here we can see the ancient Epidaurus harbour, which I talked about earlier, and then the second pyramid that we looked at. And if you look up in that grouping of blockhouses, you can see the capital of the Mycenaean Empire, Mycenae itself, and this was the centre of trade. And that's the point about these blockhouses. These blockhouses were not just here for defensive purposes, and may have been originally, but they were here to control and manage taxation and flow of goods through the Mycenaean territories along these key roads. Now, tax collection and obviously the customs charges on goods passing into and out of a territory is a very popular activity, as I'm sure you know. So it was key, therefore, that these buildings were built as military installations, defensive installations. They were storing money in them and so on. But you know, they were also defensive. They could afford to build very expensive, very dominant buildings on the site. So let's have a look at that down here. If we go from Paleoepidaurus up to the pyramid, the second pyramid that we looked at, you can see it goes through this pass, the road. And this pyramid controls anything coming through from the harbour through that pass. We then go up to the first pyramid. Now this area here used to be marshy, and you couldn't travel through it. There's a road now that goes straight through it, but the road used to have to go round, and there's a choke point where the first pyramid is, a checkpoint for goods coming into the territory from this road down in Arcadia. And Arcadia itself was a little bit lawless initially, so they built pyramids. Up here, out at the edge of the territory, another pass controlled by a checkpoint. And over here, yet another pass, another checkpoint. We come down into the centre, of course, and you've got this grouping of blockhouses up to the north here. 4 of them. That's because all the roads led to this point. Fichti, a tiny place nowadays, 4,000 years ago, was the centre of the Mycenaean world. And up on the hill, you have the palace of the Mycenaean Wanax, or king, overlooking the whole lot and taking the taxation from these checkpoints, from this road network, to build the Mycenaean Empire. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I've made this map available on Google Earth. You can see the link in my description and explore it yourselves. And it's brilliant to do so because you can then see the relationship of these blockhouses to each other, to the landscape, the topography of the landscape in particular. I've also added other elements such as Mycenaean bridges, such as Acropoli themselves. Mycenaean bridges in orange, Acropoli in purple. But it's incredibly important. You can explore this Mycenaean road network as it existed within the topography of the land and see that these checkpoints were at key locations in the land, key junctions on roads, key passes across the landscape. And I can only recommend you do that because not only is it fun to do so, to explore this Mycenaean world, but it then makes real sense. So 20 miles south of Mycenae, along the Mycenaean road to the Acropolis of Mycenae, we have another blockhouse. This one, as you can probably see, still in use, or at least incorporated into something that makes use of it. Straight sides, you can probably see about 1.5 meters in thickness, these walls, up on a slight hill, and controlling and taxing and managing the local area and people coming up and down the Mycenaean road to the Acropolis of Mycenae. So, I hope I've convinced you that these are not pyramids. What they are is highly invested, well-built checkpoints along all the key arterial roads in the Mycenaean homeland, if you like. And initially, before the Mycenaeans expanded across the rest of the Peloponnese, they were highly defensive. They protected the borders. But then they became important in terms of raising tax and customs revenue for goods and trades passing into and out of the Mycenaean territories, which allowed them to build this amazing Mycenaean civilization that we see around us now. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you watched some of my other videos. I would love some comments. I'd love to know. If you think I'm wrong and it was for UFOs, please let me know. But thank you for watching, and I look forward to doing other videos for you soon.